So, you're wondering how to get better at surfing? In this video, we're going to be looking at exactly that. We're going to be looking at a needs analysis of surfing to help us understand what we can do when we're out of the water to help us improve when we're in the water. Hello, it's Talita here from Kinetic Ability. Welcome back to episode 2 in our Surf Fit series. If you're new here, welcome to the channel and please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future content. And all the links to everything mentioned in this video can be found in the description box down below. So it's crazy times at the moment. Most countries are on lockdown. Surfing is banned. It is a better time than ever though to start with your dryland training or tweak your dryland training so that you are ready to go when the surf season starts back up. And make sure that you stick around to the end of the video because I will also be sharing with you 3 simple home screening tests to help identify what aspects you need to implement for you personally. Let's jump into it. So a lot of you are going to be familiar with a needs analysis. For those of you who are not, a needs analysis is a breakdown of a sport, okay? So you can break it down into lots of different levels. You can break it down into the components that you need in order to complete that sport. What do you do? So for example, in football, you run, you kick, you header. In surfing, we have got paddling out, duck diving, paddling to catch waves, the pop-up, backside and frontside turning, and all their kind of respective subcategories of turns. Then you've also got more advanced maneuvers such as airs, etc. All of this applies to longboarding as well, of course. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you check out episode 1, otherwise some of the stuff may get a little bit lost in translation in this episode. So right now we're gonna do a needs analysis of surfing and how you can use that information and apply it so that you can improve your surfing. So all of these activities, these movements, they require a mix of our 2 energy systems. So energy systems are how our body generate energy. Aerobic system requires oxygen and it provides us with energy for exercises that are greater than 240 seconds plus, okay? So for a surfing example, that would be your 3 hours surfing. There is some overlap with the anaerobic energy system and the aerobic energy system, just like we saw in the training principles table. There'll be more on that in the conditioning episode. Your anaerobic capacity is your ability, for example, to sprint paddle for a wave that's coming in. So it's that short burst of energy. So if we keep breaking those movements down into movement patterns, it's a combination of upper body pulling, so for example paddling, upper body pushing, for example the pop-up or a duck dive. Then you've got rotational power, example a turn. You have got flexing, so for example when you go to tuck into a barrel. You've got extending, so example when you need to paddle or when you are pumping, you do a combination of flexion, extension and rotation. To break it down again, joint by joint, you need ankle mobility, quite good hip mobility, internal rotation, external rotation, abduction, adduction. We need in general quite good lower body strength and power, so that includes the knees, the ankles and the hip. You need good trunk rotation, strength and control, so this includes your back. You need pretty good thoracic spine extension, so that is the middle part of your back, and that links into having quite good overhead flexibility. In general, upper body strength and power. So as you can see, you need to be quite robust and you need to be ticking a lot of those boxes, okay? So again, like I said before in my last video, if you do not have one of these things, that does not mean that you cannot and should not surf. It just means that you are likely to start running into a few little issues, niggles, pains, perhaps technique issues later down the line. Depending on how much you surf, you might not have any problems at all either. So just keep that in mind. So going through the motions of every single joint is just not the purpose of this video. If you're interested in that, I can post some links down below for you to check out. Let's look at a little working example. Let's take the hip. So the hip joint is a ball and socket joint, and it allows for a great deal of force transmission. So if you think of when you're doing a turn on a wave, you normally initiated with your upper body, so with your eyes and your arms, and then that eventually twist effect links into the hip and the lower leg. So let's take a look at the hip joint. The hip joint is a ball and socket joint. As you can see here, this is the femur, which sits in the acetabulum, and together they form basically the hip. This joint provides a lot of movement because it is a rotational joint. It's capable of internal rotation, external rotation, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction. So let's take an example of an applied surfing scenario, okay? So I'm regular, so let's just say this is my surfing stance, okay? What do you notice about that back leg, okay? So the one that's going to be on your tail pad, it is internally rotated, okay? So we're constantly pushing through internal and external rotation whilst we flex and extend our bodies, okay? So internal rotation, external rotation. Now I want you to imagine that person A has stiff, immobile hips. So when they go to turn, their hip isn't very good at internally rotating. What happens is the body is very, very clever, and it will steal that extra bit of range it needs from the joints above and below. So the joint above the hip is the lower back, and the joint below the hip is the knees. Okay, so probably some alarm bells are ringing for people. Knee pain, back pain, a lot of the time comes from jammed up hips. So this can affect your surfing in so many ways, okay? So from a beginner or anyone really, with their pop-up, you know, hitting your knees on the deck, scraping your feet, that kind of a thing. If you're a bit more advanced, if you're looking at how much spray you're turning on a wave, if you don't have that good transfer of force from the upper body into the lower body, that force is going to get jammed wherever the restriction is, and you will not be able to push into the wave as much, well, as you'd probably like to. There are, of course, other factors such as incorrect technique, etc., that come into play as well. So that's something important to keep in mind. I'm also going to mention that the repetitive motions of surfing do cause some imbalances on our body. So due to that back leg being internally rotated, that causes normally quite a strong change to that back leg, okay? So again, it's super important that we are training for overall joint health and function. So when we want to run or do some other things, that we don't end up favoring certain muscles because we tend to use them more when we surf. That transfers over into other aspects of your life, basically. But how are you going to apply that information? How do you know what you need to work on to improve your surfing? So there are a couple of different ways. So obviously some things are a bit more obvious than others. For example, if you're getting pain, if you're whacking your knee off the board, they are pretty obvious signs that you can pick up on that you need to change something. Secondly, you can apply what I'm teaching you and what's coming up at the end of the video to help screen yourself, to try and identify a few key areas that you can work on. Lastly, you can come and see someone like me. And thank you for those who watched to the end of the video. So here are those 3 bonus home screens that you can implement to help you figure out which of those elements might be impacting your surfing. The first test that you can try is to see your strength, okay? How many push-ups can you do? And I'm not talking about crappy form push-ups. I'm talking about strict form, and when your form fails, that is your max number. Same for pull-ups, okay? We spend over 50% of our time in the water paddling, so you need solid upper body pushing and pulling strength. That is your first test. Second test is to help identify if you have got any limitations in the upper shoulders or like back, basically. So all you have to do is stand up. For the W arm slide test, stand against the wall with your elbows and your lower back touching the wall. Start sliding your arms slowly up the wall, but your elbows and lower back need to stay in contact with the wall at all times. It helps if you have someone who can try and slide their hand in the small of your back whilst it's on the wall. They shouldn't be able to if you are doing this right. So most people get to around 90 degrees and then they start arching their back to try and get that extra range. Ideally, you would be somewhere between the 150 and 180 range. If this is problematic for you, we need to work on your overhead flexibility and mobility, which is what we're covering in the next episode, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. And the next screen is to see if you can use your hips independently of your lower back. So there's a couple of different ways that you can test this. I think the most accessible for most people is probably with a tennis ball. You are going to go on your hands and your knees, okay? Then you need to place that ball just on the lower bit of your back, okay? So there should be like a little kind of a dish almost in that bit of your back. Then you're going to press up onto your toes, okay? And you are going to try your best, okay? So lift one arm off at a time. Then you're going to try and lift your foot off as well, okay? So obviously what's going to happen, okay, if I start moving, okay? So if I were to do that badly, okay, that's a sign that you are pairing your hip with your back during movements of one or the other. So in this instance, I'm trying to move the hip without moving the lower back. And the ball basically just serves as a cue when it falls, or you can feel it rolling on your lower back. That means that you need to tighten up your core control. So I think we'll be covering that again in the next episode, and also probably in a bit more detail in the turning episode. So stay tuned for that. That brings us to the end of episode 2. We hope that you learned something new in how to improve your surfing. And if you did enjoy this video, we would really appreciate if you could hit that thumbs up button and share this video with someone who surfs. And let us know what you think. Would you like us to cover any topics? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. Stay strong during these times, and I will see you in the next episode.